Where would we be without long-haul truckers? They haul everything from fresh produce to building materials to clothes and electronics and much more. Truckers also have a lot to contend with their very many long hours on the road, time away from family and crazy deadlines that must be met. Most truckers are honest, hard-working people, happy to grab some rest and a hot meal on their way home from a long trip. But what if someone became a long-haul trucker for less wholesome reasons? What if this profession provided them the perfect cover for more nefarious activities? While we all agree, like any pocket of society, most truckers are great people. Today, however, we will look at 3 cases where serial offenders posed as harmless long-haul truckers in which to conduct their crimes almost undetected. I'm Andrea M, and this is Real Crime International.
Officers are on the scene. Proceed with caution. Suspect is armed. Officer in need of assistance from animal control. Suspect is in custody.
Please consider liking, subscribing and sharing if you are enjoying the content. And if you are new here, hello and welcome. It's nice to meet you. Case number 1. Timothy J. Vafidis, also known as the Vampire Trucker. And just as a side note, all of these cases today take place in the United States. So Timothy J. Vafidis, also known as the Vampire Trucker from the state of Utah, is not a serial killer as far as we know. Rather, he was a truck-driving kidnapper who abducted multiple women over the years, holding them in the sleeper berth of his truck, and unfortunately that would be where he would beat them up. He would also SA them. He also filed some of their teeth into fangs and forced some of them to marry him. So where this filing their teeth into fangs, etc. came from was the fact that Vafidis was reportedly obsessed with the Twilight movie and book series, and he had even had a fake set of fangs made for himself, and that's where he got the name the Vampire Trucker from. So now we go back to 2013. In 2013, Timothy J. Vafidis invited an unnamed 19-year-old female relative to come to stay with him on the ruse of helping him with his trucking company. Instead of following through on that, he essayed her repeatedly and began beating her on a regular basis. Eventually, these beatings turned into strangulation, with him choking her until she lost consciousness. The essays also continued the entire time that she remained with him, and she was unable to escape Vafidis because obviously he was holding her captive so that she couldn't escape. But he had also confiscated her driver license, her social security card, her cell phone, and her SIM card. This unfortunate lady's nightmare finally came to an end when a state trooper recognised her in Clay County, Minnesota. So obviously this girl had been reported as missing when she's gone to stay with Vafidis and has seemingly disappeared after that. So as we've already said, he was obsessed with the Twilight movies, he was obsessed with vampires in general, and he also named his trucking company after the book and movie series, calling it Twilight Express Trucking. So this made it sound like it was a large trucking company with many trucks in its fleet. However, it was only him. It was just him and his truck. So whether he was trying to make it sound like he had a big trucking company to try and hide his tracks a little bit, I'm not sure, it wasn't gone into much in the research that I did, but that could maybe have been a little way of him trying to cover his tracks. So, the vampire obsession that Timothy J. Vafides had pushed him to the point of wanting to file down some of his victims' teeth with a Dremel power tool in order to make them as pointy and fang-like as possible. He had ordered several sets of fake fangs for himself, and he also purchased some for one of his victims, and that was the 19-year-old female relative that he held hostage. Why it was different for her, I don't know. Maybe he hadn't purchased the Dremel tool yet, but consecutive victims did have their teeth filed down. And one of the consecutive victims that came along later referred to Vafides as the dentist because of his passion for messing around with their teeth and trying to make them look vampiric. In 2012, Vafides picked up a woman at a truck stop. From there, what was supposed to be a simple dinner date turned into an abduction. He then forced the woman to dye and cut her hair. From there, he would beat her with a belt, and later he would force her to marry him. Over the course of this unfortunate woman's captivity, he also had her do his trucking company paperwork, which he never paid her for. And the lady remains unnamed to this day, probably to keep her identity safe even at this time. So the unnamed woman's unfortunate time with the pseudo-undead ended when officials at a trucking way station noticed that she had bruises on her face and managed to get her away from Vafides and call the police, where she would later press charges against him in Florida for domestic abuse, because we have to remember she was forced to marry this guy. I know what I'd like to call him, but I'm not going to do that. We're supposed to be objective here, but she was forced to marry him. So now we're going to head back to the late 1990s, when Timothy J. Vafides was attempting to live a semblance of a normal life. He married a woman named Dana Platt, and at the time he was working as a nurse of all things, despite the fact that he had previously been charged with domestic violence. So Ms. Platt had 2 children, both of whom lived with their grandmother, and that would be Platt's mother that they were living with. So she would go on to take them with her when she eloped with Vafides in Idaho in 1998. Their marriage didn't last long, however, and Platt was charged with parental abduction for taking her children away with her when they were under the order of custody, that her mother had custody of them, and she did serve some time in prison. And at the time of her arrest, she had told her mother that Vafides had been violent with her. So the company that Timothy J. Vafides ran, Twilight Express Trucking, and we've already said it only had 1 truck, but clients had located it throughout the country, so he was obviously just going anywhere he could go. And he had kept women captive while he was doing these long-haul trips to various states, including Nebraska, Idaho, and Florida. And according to the official Interstate trucking records, the business was based in Elizabeth, Colorado, and it once transported a water well. What that's got to do with anything, I'm not sure, but it might just show all the different things that he was doing at this time. So running a small one-man trucking company provided Vafides with a great way to cover up his activities. Nobody was noticing the women that he kidnapped because it wasn't likely, as his neighbours were used to him not being there for long stretches of time. He didn't have a regular routine. So if he'd have just had a house in a regular neighbourhood, the neighbours might have noticed strange comings and goings. But as we've seen before with cases like this, with serial killers, serial offenders, a lot of the time they do kind of come in and out undetected by their neighbours. If we look at cases like Gacy or Bundy, people like that, they were conducting their activities right there in the neighbourhood, and it wasn't until, especially with Gacy, like, the bodies were piling up and there was a foul smell beginning to emanate from his home that anybody realised anything was wrong. So maybe if he had been living in a neighbourhood environment, somebody may have noticed something, but maybe not. So after Timothy J. Vafides was arrested in May of 2013 for violating a restraining order, authorities then began to search his truck. They would go on to find a computer and separate hard drive, and this is where the case becomes extremely icky. His computer and hard drive was filled with child pornography. There were hundreds, reportedly, of videos on the computer as well as pictures. And if it wasn't enough that he kept sex slaves in his truck, Vafides is also reportedly a paedophile. Although the timeline is unclear, Timothy J. Vafides had at least 6 victims that police know of over the years. So this is what the police know of. There may be more. Each of these women was forced to live in his truck, to shower with him, and to not leave his side at the rest stops. He would repeatedly assault and essay all of them. 4 of the women were married to him at various points during their ordeals. And it is unknown if his acknowledged ex-wife, Dana Platt, is considered to be one of these 6. 2 of his victims were extremely young, just 18 and 19 years old. As we said before, Timothy J. Vafides married Dana Platt in 1998. She had 2 daughters, a 6-year-old named Kayla and a 3-year-old named Tabitha Rose. Both children lived with their grandmother who had primary custody of them. So as we said earlier, it led to Platt's arrest as she took the children with her when she ran off with Vafides. The children ended up in foster care while Platt spent 2 years in prison, which was the catalyst for her divorce from the abusive Vafides. It is unknown how much contact he had with the children afterwards, but I'm hoping it wasn't much. It also turns out that the 19-year-old female relative who travelled with Vafides for several months also had a protective order against him, that he should not have had any contact with her at all. So as we said earlier, he lured her in with a promise of a job, and he told her that she could make a quick 10 grand. But from there that never happened, and he quickly essayed her and turned her into one of his victims. And she, like the others, was also unable to leave the truck without him by her side. In May of 2013, officers working at a truck stop in Minnesota noticed the bruises on the woman and pulled her away from him. After questioning her, they realised that the protective order had been filed in 1999 and arrested him. According to authorities, Timothy J. Vafides allegedly assaulted at least one woman that he met online, and he also spent time on college campuses, no doubt casing potential co-ed victims. When Vafides was arrested in 2013, several of his past victims came forward, putting his official victim count at 6. However, there is the possibility that other women are still afraid to admit they were victimised by him. Now that he has been sentenced to 20 years in prison, and this happened in 2016, they might come forward. So it was in November of 2016 that he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was found guilty of 1 count of transporting child pornography and 2 counts of transporting people across state lines for illegal sexual activity. He would go on to plead guilty, and in exchange, other charges were dropped. When he is finally released from prison, he will be under close supervision for the rest of his life. That just leads me to a question of, why on earth would you let somebody like him out? There's too many unanswered questions in this case. Obviously, in the research, I couldn't find the names, apart from his wife, Dana Platt, that any of these victims wanted their names mentioned in any of the research or the news reports to do with this guy. So obviously he put them through absolutely horrific things. He is now in prison. Why on earth would you even consider letting somebody like him go? Particularly with the child pornography stuff. He's a paedophile. He kidnaps people, he subjects them to torture and God only knows what else. And we don't know for sure that he hasn't killed people. Why would you let him go? I honestly hope that they don't ever let this guy out. But as I always tell you guys, if any of these cases do have updates in the future or whatever, I will let you guys know. But I am hoping like hell they never let this guy out, because, oh my God. I can't believe they'd even consider it. Anyway, let's move on to case number 2. So, case number 2 is the case of Sean Patrick Goebel, and you may be familiar with his name as he is known as the Interstate Killer. Sean Patrick Goebel, known as the Interstate Killer, is an American serial killer, again from the US, and he is also a former truck driver. So Goebel would go on to kidnap and murder at least 4 women that we know of in the southern United States between 1994 and 1995. Since his arrest, authorities in 10 other states have investigated him for numerous unsolved killings of women. While he was cleared in some of those cases, as of today, his true victim count remains unclear. So, Sean Patrick Goebel was born on the 1st of November 1966 in Asheboro, North Carolina. He was the son of Kenneth and Emma Goebel. His family moved to Illinois. So the first major event to happen in Sean Patrick Goebel's life occurred at the age of 6, when his father essayed a 10-year-old girl during a home invasion in Rockford. Young Sean was sitting in his dad's vehicle outside of the crime scene during the attack. Kenneth was charged with the crime and was sentenced to serve 4 to 20 years in prison. However, he was released after only 4 years. As for Sean, he, his mother and sister continued to live in Rockford, where he attended Auburn High School. In 1984, he dropped out during his senior year. 2 years later, his father, who was now living in New Mexico, was charged with essaying a 6-year-old girl there, for which he was sent back to prison, being released sometime in 1994. Why do they keep releasing these guys? It stuns me, it really does. So Sean Goebel joined the army and later got married, and he fathered a son. His marriage later fell apart, and Sean moved to North Carolina in 1988 and began working as a truck driver in 1991. At 225 pounds and 6 foot 3 inches, Goebel described himself as a ladies' man. And now we move into the unfortunate victims and his career of serial killing on the interstate, giving him the name the Interstate Killer. The first victim that we know of was a woman named Lisa Susan O'Rourke, who was 29 and a native of St. Louis, Missouri. In January 1994, Goebel picked O'Rourke up along Interstate 10 in either Louisiana or Mississippi. He and O'Rourke had had sexual relations before he strangled her to death, dumping her body under a bridge along Interstate 65 in Alabama. Her body was found on January 23, and her death was initially ruled as hypothermia, but it was eventually ruled that she had been, in fact, murdered. Her identity was not revealed until April of that year, and that was via fingerprinting. His next victim was a woman named Brenda K. Hagee, 45, and was a native of Bloomington, Indiana. Hagee had a criminal history of charges in her native state for trespassing into truck stops, areas that are hot spots for prostitution. And these unfortunate women who do cross into the truck stops all up and down the interstates, and I'm not sure if it's the same in Australia, but they are known as lot lizards. So it's not a very nice name, and I'm sure that these working girls were just doing what they felt they had to survive. But yeah, that's what they call them. They call them lot lizards, which I think is kind of mean, but you've probably heard the term before, and if you're wondering what it meant, that's what it means. So apparently these truck stops are hot spots for prostitution. And if you will look into another unusual case that we all should be probably familiar with if you've watched the movie Monster, that Charlize Theron starred in and did an amazing job as serial killer Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos used to pose as a prostitute, and she would also frequent truck stops in order to gain victims, men looking for a good time with a prostitute. So that's another interesting case we can look at on a future video. I have been wanting to cover Eileen Wuornos for a while because she is so unusual as a female serial killer. But you know, as with any profession, there's male and females in every aspect of life, unfortunately. So Hagee frequently moved across the east side of the country as a vagrant. She stayed at a homeless shelter in Gainesville, Florida on January 22, 1995. The next day she voyaged to Tennessee, where at a service station she was abducted by Goebel, who proceeded to essay and strangle her to death, breaking her neck in the process. He later drove his truck all the way to Bristol, Virginia, where he left her body along an access road to Interstate 81. This guy's particularly sadistic. He ran over her legs while in the process of driving away. And okay. I know the poor victim was already deceased at this stage, but that's so disrespectful to just dump her like garbage and then just run her over like she was nothing. And not even care to just leave her body in at least some kind of a state where if somebody was to come and claim her, there wouldn't be these terrible injuries to her, but he just dumped her and ran her body over. And even though she was deceased, I still feel that that's a very sadistic type of a thing to do. Her body was found later that day. An investigation was set up by police who received numerous tips, the most promising being from a trucker who said he saw a semi parked along the same access road hours before Hagee's body was discovered. Sherry 2 Manser, 34, had a history of arrests for prostitution from 1982 to 1994, and she is the third victim. She was last seen alive by friends and family on January 31, 1995, while visiting her sister in Bowie, Maryland. She later left the home with her 2-year-old niece. Her niece was located alive the following morning in Washington, D.C. In Fredericksburg, Virginia, Goebel picked up Ms. Manser while driving his truck. According to Goebel, the two engaged in sexual relations before he decided to strangle her to death. He would dump her body along Interstate 40, where it was found on February 19. When it was found, her identity could not be conclusively proven, so for the next few months she was only known as Jane Doe. His fourth victim is Alice Rebecca Haynes. She was 36 years old and was a native of Columbus, Ohio. She also had been convicted of prostitution in the past, and her last known location before her death was in Salina, Kansas, when she called from a truck stop along Interstate 70. From there, it is believed she hitchhiked to Tennessee, where Goebel kidnapped her from a gas station and smothered her to death. He would then dump her body along Interstate 81 in Virginia. During the investigation, a plastic bag left behind at Hagee's murder scene contained the fingerprint of her killer. When submitted into a database, investigators got a hit when it matched to a print taken from Goebel in September of 1994 after an arrest for multiple misdemeanors. From there, he was arrested in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, outside the Rocky Road Express, the trucking company that he was working for at the time. A search warrant was issued on his truck. In it, police found a pocketbook that belonged to Haynes, And if you're wondering what a pocketbook is, it's just another word for a purse, which I think is actually quite lovely. I do like that name for a lady's purse as a pocketbook. I don't know, it's just old-fashioned and it's quite nice. They also seized travel bags, pornographic magazines, and women's underwear. During an interrogation, Goebel confessed to both murders and admitted that he had killed a woman in North Carolina. Authorities figured out it was the Jane Doe and he was charged with her death. When the woman was identified as Mansour, he was charged with murder. Along with Tennessee and North Carolina, Goebel was also investigated in killings in numerous other states. A day after his arrest, he was investigated for the 1992 murder of 21-year-old Tammy Zawicki of Evesham, New Jersey. For a brief period of time, Goebel was investigated as a suspect for the serial killer known as Dr. No. He was later cleared of suspicion in those cases because in some of the earlier killings, Goebel was still in high school and later the army. Some murders that Goebel was suspected of include multiple Jane Does found along the highways between 1987 and 1995, the murder of Marsha Matthews in 1985, the murder of Shirley Dean Taylor in 1986, the murder of April Barnett, also in 1986, and the murder of Anna Patterson in 1987, the murder of Catherine Hill, aka Wendy Turner, in 1990, the murder of Cheryl Mason in 1991, the murder of Nona Cobb in 1992, and the murder of Margaret Goines in 1995. Goebel was ruled out in Cobb's murder due to DNA testing, and in 2022 a different man was arrested for her death. Goebel briefly stated that the murder of Hagee was unintentional, but that was disproved by the investigators. Goebel pled guilty to killing Hagee and Haynes in Tennessee, for which he was imposed 2 life sentences. He was later extradited to North Carolina and pled guilty to the murder of Mansour, receiving an additional 14 years to his 2 life sentences. Due to these convictions, Goebel would be required to serve at least 103 years to even be considered for parole. So I'd say that he's never going to be considered for parole, and that's a good thing. Later that same month, Goebel was indicted with O'Rourke's murder. Goebel was transferred to the Baldwin County Correction Center to await trial for murder. In April 1997, however, Alabama authorities decided not to prosecute him any further because of his current life sentences. Goebel would later take back his confessions, but nevertheless stayed behind bars. Goebel is currently serving his sentence at Northeast Correctional Complex in Doe Valley, Tennessee. And our final case on today's rather scary lineup of long-haul truckers that became serial offenders is Bruce D. Mendenhall. He was born April 14, 1951. He's also from the United States. He is a murderer and a convicted serial killer. He was arrested in Tennessee in July of 2007 and found guilty in 2010 of the June 26, 2007 murder of Sarah Hulbert, whose body was found by the security guard on duty that night. A long-haul trucker, Mendenhall's truck, was found to contain the blood of numerous other murdered or missing women. And Bruce Mendenhall also did not go without a nickname that was given to him, and he was nicknamed as the Rest Stop or the Truck Stop Killer. He has been charged with the murders of 3 other women at truck stops in Alabama, Indiana, and Tennessee. He is still under investigation for murders in Georgia, Illinois, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. So, Bruce Mendenhall grew up in Crawford County, Illinois, and he was actually married and he had 2 daughters of his own. He was a resident of Albion, Illinois, and Mendenhall was arrested at the TA truck stop on Interstate 24 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 12, 2007, after Detective Sergeant Postiglione spotted a truck that matched surveillance footage from the night Sarah Nicole Hulbert was murdered at the same truck stop. Upon inspection of the vehicle, a large quantity of bloody clothing, an ID, and personal effects of an Indianapolis woman who had gone missing the day before was found, and it was found in a plastic sack along with blood spots scattered around the inside of the cab. And this would even include the steering wheel, and he would still have blood spatter on his hands. Mendenhall was arrested and taken into custody. Police catalogued 300 items from the truck, including a rifle, knives, handcuffs, latex gloves, several weapons, cartridges, black tape, a nightstick, and a variety of, can't say this any nicer, so I'm just going to say it, sex toys. Sampling of these items turned up the DNA of 5 different women. On August 2nd, 2007, Mendenhall waived his right to a preliminary hearing. Mendenhall's victims were primarily young prostitutes, usually found shot, though detectives have determined that his method of killing may have changed over the years. During questioning, he implicated himself in the shooting of Hulbert, whose body was found on June 26, 2007. He has also implicated himself in the shooting death of Samantha Winters, whose body was found June 6, 2007 in a trash can at a truck stop in Lebanon, Tennessee. She had a criminal record showing at least one previous charge of prostitution. On August 17, 2007, a Wilson County grand judge indicted Mendenhall for the murder of Winters, who was subsequently convicted and sentenced to life. Another victim killed on July 11, 2007 at a Flying J truck stop on Interstate 465 in Indianapolis, Indiana was recently found. Her name was Karma Pupura, a 31-year-old mother of 2, and she was last seen at the far south side Indianapolis truck stop. On April 10, 2008, Marion County prosecutor Carl Brizzi charged Mendenhall with murder in the case. DNA tests linked a large quantity of the blood from Mendenhall's cab to the woman's parents. Investigators also found her cell phone, ATM card, and clothing she wore on the day that she disappeared. And the way that they've linked her, they've tested her parents against her blood is if you're related to somebody, particularly if you're their child or you're their parent, you have a lot of, now I have to think, I think it's called alleles or something like that, that there's a certain number that have to show up in your blood to say that yes, you are the child of these 2 parents. So that is how they have identified this lady as being the daughter of the parents. It wasn't until 4 years later after her killing that her remains were discovered just off I-65 in Kentucky. On July 28, police in Birmingham, Alabama charged Mendenhall with the murder of Lucille Greta Carter, who was found naked in a trash bin with a plastic bag taped around her head on July 1st. They would also find that she had been shot with a .22 caliber weapon. Investigators said Mendenhall was initially cooperative, but subsequently ceased to implicate himself in further murders. Police are investigating the possibility that Mendenhall is responsible for other murders in the region, and this would include the following victims. Deborah Ann Glover, an Atlanta prostitute whose body was found near a Motel 6 in Suwanee, Georgia on January 29, 2007. Police are certain that Mendenhall was in Georgia on the day that Glover was shot. Sherry Drinkard, a prostitute from Gary, Indiana, whose body was found naked in a snow embankment. And as we said before, Tammy Zawicki, a student who was found stabbed to death on September 2nd, 1992. Tammy had vanished from Interstate 80 near LaSalle, Illinois 9 days before, and that would be after she dropped her brother at Northwestern University. Robin Bishop, a prostitute who was run over at a Flying J truck stop on Interstate 40 in Fairview, Tennessee on July 1st, 2007. Belinda Cartwright, a hitchhiker who was run over also at a truck stop in Georgia in 2001. A composite police sketch made of the suspect based on information from witnesses bears a striking resemblance to Mendenhall. Until August 2009, Mendenhall was also considered in the murder of Jennifer Smith, a prostitute found naked at a truck stop in Bucksnort, Tennessee, in April of 2005. DNA evidence in 2009 proved that she was the second victim of killer John Wayne Boyer, and we may explore him on a further video. In 2018, Mendenhall was found guilty of first-degree murder in Tennessee. He received a life sentence for the murder of Samantha Winters and is connected to other murders in multiple states. In 2021, it was reported that Mendenhall was transferred to Indiana to stand trial for the 2007 murder of Carmen Pupera. He denies being a serial killer and claims to only be guilty of trusting a cop. Okay, like they all do, even though there's DNA evidence supporting otherwise. Interesting. And that is fortunately where we leave our long-haul trip into nightmares of lonely highways and seemingly friendly strangers. Stay safe out there, everybody, and I will see you in my next video. And just a quick little update on some of the things I was talking about when I did my last couple of videos. How I hadn't had an awful lot of time lately to make videos. Well, I'm happy to say that an opportunity has now opened up where my time is going to be a little bit more free, and I will have my time back to be able to make videos on a regular basis again, and that makes me really happy. So I'll be bringing you more regular videos once again. So to everybody who's stuck with me and keeps watching, and the new subscribers, everybody, thank you guys so much. It is greatly appreciated.